All right, we talked about quarterbacks yesterday. Let's stay in the backfield. Let's stay with the offensive guys. Let's stay with those guys who are going to touch the ball a lot this season. Let's talk about Pitt's running backs. What is the biggest storyline around Pitt's running backs this season? Who are the players you need to know? What are the biggest question marks facing that group? And what's the stat that's going to make you sound smart to your friends today? Hopefully you used our stat yesterday about projecting Nate Yarnell for 3,000 yards, 20 touchdowns, and 7 interceptions. We got one about the running backs this year that you can tell your friends around the water cooler, because you're certainly going to be talking about Pitt running backs today. We got a stat for you that you can dig into as we break down the running back position, what it looks like for Pitt this year, what the Panthers need out of their running backs, who's going to emerge as the number one back, which might just be the biggest question, and how effective they can be coming out of the backfield. Let's talk running backs for 2024 on today's Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, a lot to say about the running backs. I think it's a really interesting position for Pitt this year. I think there's a couple wild card guys, a couple guys who could be X factors. It's also a position where freshmen can and have produced, and so you can't rule out those guys. You've got a bunch of scholarship players to consider here, maybe as many as 4, who could be 5, really, who could be involved in the rotation and see touches this season. So it's going to be an interesting position to watch. It's going to be an important position. This offense, we talk a lot about the passing game. We talk about the quarterbacks. I've talked so much about the wide receivers. The running backs are going to be involved, and they're going to be an important part of the offense. If this thing's going to work, they're going to need contributions out of the running backs. What are they going to get this year from the guys they have on the roster? We got a lot to break down here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. First, there was a little bit of news yesterday. It didn't come out of Pitt, because why would Pitt announce something like this? Ohio State announced its non-conference men's basketball schedule yesterday, and lo and behold, there's your University of Pittsburgh basketball Panthers scheduled for a trip to Columbus on November 29th. Twitter tells me that's the day after Thanksgiving, something I did not fact check and double, and confirm before I sat down to say that. It's true. Thanksgiving is on November 28th. On November 29th, Pitt will be going to Columbus. I don't think Ohio State announced a start time for that. That'd be cool if we got like an afternoon game out of that one. That could be a good time. A little afternoon Pitt Ohio State basketball. We'll see what ends up coming out of that. But an intriguing matchup. Very interesting to see Pitt going to Ohio State. Talk about beefing up the non-conference schedule, something that was held against the Panthers last year. Although, like I said all of last year, Jeff Capel said it last year. Yes, Pitt's non-conference schedule got held against them. But one, it doesn't hurt you as much if you beat Missouri. 2, like all these teams that they got compared to, like TCU played garbage non-conference schedules too, but the difference was everybody in the Big 12 played a garbage non-conference schedule, and everybody in the Big 12 beat the crap out of their non-conference opponents. So they all got their net rankings boosted up. So when they ended up playing each other, they were all like top 100 or top 150 or top 50 net ranked teams. They gamed the system that way, not just by the individual team beating up on cupcakes, but by having everybody in the conference do it. And this is what fell short last year. And this is something that we mentioned. I talked about it a lot heading into the tournament last year. Jeff Capel talked about it. Pitt did. When I forget who it was. Paul Zeiss or somebody wrote about how like TCU cracked the code. Jamie Dixon figured out how to game the system. Just like he used to game the RPI, he's been gaming the net rankings. And it's true, he did. He scheduled a bunch of cupcakes and beat the crap out of them. But the difference between what Pitt did and what TCU did, because Pitt did the same thing. Pitt scheduled a garbage non-conference schedule, and they more or less took care of business. The Missouri game stands out as one, glaring failure. And if you win that game, who knows, you probably make the NCAA tournament. But the problem was the rest of the ACC didn't do it. The rest of the Big 12 did. And so the rest of the Big 12 scheduled a crappy non-conference. They beat the crap out of those teams. So then when they were all playing each other, they were all facing like top 50 net ranked teams. They were all facing teams that had high net rankings because they had boosted them with big margins of victory in the non-conference. The ACC didn't have that. Pitt got it right. Pitt did the right thing. The rest of the conference let them down. And I mean, at one point, I even asked Jeff Capel. I was like, "Look, you're talking about. There's all this talk about schools like gaming the system. Like, what would you guys change? What could you change? It looks to me like your schedule is crap. You guys scheduled it that way. You scheduled the winnable non-conference. What could change here? And it ultimately came down, and I forget if he said this directly on the record or just sort of hinted at it, and somebody mentioned it to me later off the record of like, the thing that needs to change is the rest of the conference doing it. Well, now Pitt's got, they've got Mississippi State in the ACC SEC Challenge. They're going to get LSU in this Greenbrier thing. They get West Virginia. Now they've added Ohio State. That's a lot of power conference teams to have in the non-conference schedule. They'll get a second game in the Greenbrier thing against another power conference team. So they've beefed up the non-conference. If the rest of the ACC isn't going to get on board with the Big 12 model, then Pitt will just have to, blank you, Joe Boo, I'll go and do it myself, right? They'll just have to go out and take care of business themselves, schedule tougher in the non-conference, and hope that it pays off down the road. Our good friend Panther for Life, I mentioned him last week. He was in the mailbag. He said this is a Twitter follow you need to be on because he's one of the most active, interesting, informative, and educated Pitt fans on Twitter. Sent me a nice breakdown of Ohio State. It's a talented squad. Bruce Thornton is the point guard. Really good player. Should be a good matchup for Jalen Lowe. They brought in Michi Johnson, who you might remember that Pitt was after in the transfer portal. They got a 6'7" wing and Micah Parrish. As much as we talk about Delalich, he's going to be a good matchup there. A couple of big 6'9", 7'1" guys to play the two forward positions. Again, a good matchup for Guillermo Diaz-Graham and Cam Corrin. It should be a good game. It should be a good matchup, and they're going on the road. So you get that opportunity to get, A, a huge win, beating a power conference team on the road, or B, a loss that shouldn't hurt you as much because you're going on the road against a power conference team and one that should be pretty good. Should be a great matchup. If nothing else, and I know after what happened this past March, I think we're all focused on what Pitt can do with their NCAA tournament resume and how they can improve themselves and get themselves into the big dance and all of that. But just for a second, set it aside and remember that we're all sports fans. And Pitt going to Ohio State should produce a really good game to watch. Implications aside, all these other things, what it's going to mean for the net ranking and their Ken Pom and all that. It should just be a great basketball game. It should be a lot of fun to watch this basketball game. I'm excited about it. I think you probably are too. It's going to be early in the season. It's November 29th. A heck of a way to get things started. And it should be a game on the day that it is. I mean, we'll see what time it ends up getting scheduled for. It should be a game that garners national attention. And again, good opportunity for Pitt, not just to build their net ranking and their tournament resume, but good opportunity for Pitt to go out and, get a little national pub and get a little national respect. Should be a lot of fun. Looking forward to that one. Shout out to Pitt for getting it done. And Ohio State, I mean, you got to have two teams have to agree to a game like that, but shout out to Pitt for going out and getting the game scheduled. I'm looking forward to it. I think it'll be a lot of fun. All right, running back time. Let's talk about Pitt's running backs here on the Morning Pitt on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Before we do, of course, do us a favor, like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, where we put all of our Pitt video content, these daily morning Pitt videos, our weekly live show. Tomorrow night at 8:30 p.m. we'll be live right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Jim Hammett and I will be talking about Pitt, Ohio State, talking about some of these position things heading into training camp, which is coming up real soon. ACC Media Days are happening. Pitt will be speaking today. Pitt's players and coaches, Pat Narduzzi, Gavin Bartholomew, Donovan McMillan, Nate Yarnell, they'll all be talking today. We'll see what interesting nuggets come out of that. And I'm certainly, we'll talk about it tomorrow on the Morning Pitt. We'll talk about it tomorrow night on the live show. So subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com so you don't miss any of it. And then, of course, the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com for all your Pitt sports coverage and discussion on the message boards, Panther-Lair.com. All right, the running back situation. All right. We're going to talk about the biggest storyline. We're going to talk about the names to know. We're talking about the biggest question. I think, to me, there's always just sort of a general question of, can you get effective play? You know what I mean? Can the position be good? Can be an asset? Can it help you win games? But I think with Pitt this year, there's not equally interesting question, but a very interesting question of, will Rodney Hammond be the man? And for the longest time, I was like, yeah, of course he's the man. He is the man. He's done a lot of good. I'll give you a great stat on Rodney Hammond. It's one that I've put out there before. I put it out there last year, and I'll put it out again. And I think Rodney Hammond's a good player. I think he's a really good back. But as the summer has progressed and maybe the heat's just getting to me, I've wondered more and more about it. I've wondered more and more about Rodney Hammond, what his role will be. Is he going to be stuck in that 100 to 130 carry space that he's been stuck in for the last 3 years? He's had at least 100 carries each of the 3 years of his college career, but he's never had more than 118, which was last year. Is he going to top 120 carries this year? And he played 12 games. So it's not like he was limited due to injury. He was the primary back and he played 12 games. Now, we talked a lot during the season about the curious personnel decisions at running back, the rotation at running back, and how it didn't really make sense. And I have to think that it's at least partially, it's at least part of the reason that Andre Powell was let go this offseason, because it didn't make sense what they were doing with Rodney Hammond in the offense and not using him more. The running back rotation didn't make sense, and quite frankly, it didn't make sense for the last few years. I mean, this, we don't need to backtrack that far on it, but there is a question about what Rodney Hammond's ceiling is. What can he really be? I think he's got some speed, but he's not the fastest guy. I think he's got some ability to shed tackles, but he's not the strongest guy. I think he more or less holds up, although he's not the most durable guy. He's a decent pass catcher, but it's not like he's caught all that many passes in his career. He's got 22 receptions, never had more than 8 in a season. He can score some touchdowns, but last year with the most carries of his career, he only had 4, which is the fewest touchdowns in a single season of his career. So I go back and forth about Rodney Hammond. Here's the great stat. Here's the stat that works in Hammond's favor to a certain extent, although there's a correlation causation discussion to be had that we are probably not smart enough to really dig into. But Rodney Hammond has had 8 games in his career when he's carried the ball 15 times or more. You want to guess Pitt's record in those 8 games? 8-0. New Hampshire in 2021, Clemson, or Duke in 2021, Virginia in 2021, the ACC Coastal clinching game. Syracuse in 2021, West Virginia in 2022, Syracuse in 2022, UCLA in 2022, and then the Boston College game this past season. Is that up? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 games where he's carried the ball 15 times or more, and Pitt is undefeated in those 8 games. Very much a question of whether or not that's correlation or causation. Might just be correlation and not causation, but it's an interesting coincidence, and it's 8-0. If Rodney Hammond carries the ball 10 times or more, Pitt is 12-5, which is not bad when you're looking over the course of 3 seasons. One of which was the time when they threw the ball like 500 times in 2021 with the Biletnikoff Award winner and a Heisman Trophy finalist at quarterback. The next season of Rodney Hammond's career, he was behind a guy who ended up leading the country in rushing touchdowns and broke a Tony Dorsett single game rushing record. And then this past season, where his usage was questionable, but 17 games over the course of 3 seasons where he's carried the ball 10 times or more, and in Pitt's record in those 17 games is 12-5. I think that's notable. Again, there might be a correlation causation thing there, but I think that's notable and interesting that when Hammond has gotten more usage, Pitt has won more often than not. Now, flip side, Rodney Hammond had 118 carries last year. If you look at all the running backs in the ACC who had at least 100 rushing attempts, there were 18 of them, and Hammond ranks near the bottom in most major statistical categories. Now, his 118 attempts were the 15th most in the conference. So there were 14 guys who carried the ball more than him. Of the 18 backs who had at least 100 attempts, there were only 3 who had fewer than Hammond. But he ended up 16th out of 18 in rushing yards, 14th out of 18 in yards per carry, 16th out of 18 in rushing touchdowns. He was 11th out of 18 in yards after contact per attempt. He was 11th out of 18 in missed tackles forced. He was 16th out of 18 in carries that gained 10 yards or more. He was 16th out of 18 in carries that gained a first down. He was 16th out of 18 in breakaway yards. These are all, stats that come from Pro Football Focus and their record keeping. He was 16th out of 18 in the conference in designed carries that gained at least 15 yards or more. He had 6. These are not stats that speak well of Rodney Hammond. And he was second in the conference among running backs with at least 100 rushing attempts in fumbles with 3 last year. These are not stats. Oh, and he was tied with Will Shipley in that category and a couple other guys. So, Omarion Hampton and, some good backs. Bashol Tootin, the kid from Virginia Tech, led the conference, or at least running backs with at least 100 rushing attempts with 5 fumbles. So my mind says Rodney Hammond's a good running back. My mind says Rodney Hammond's a productive playmaking running back. A lot of these stats don't necessarily back that up. Now, with his 118 rushing attempts, there were only 2 backs in the conference last year who carried the ball at least 200 times. There were another 7 who carried the ball 150 times or more. And there were 2 more who carried the ball at least 130 times. So 12 running backs in the conference who had at least 130 carries, 14 who had at least 120 carries, Rodney Hammond with 118. So on the lower end of that usage, certainly for a team's number 1 running back, but that's still a pretty decent sample size. Maybe not as much, it's not 150 carries. It's not even 120 or 130. But 118 is a decent sample size. Is it enough to judge Rodney Hammond? 118 rushing attempts. For comparison, there's another running back on this team who had last year 131 rushing attempts, finished with a net of 897 rushing yards compared to Hammond's 547. So 13 additional carries produced 350 additional yards, an average of 6.8 yards per carry, 13 rushing touchdowns. Hammond averaged 4.6 yards per carry and had 4 rushing touchdowns. Of course, I'm talking about Desmond Reed. And I'll be the first to admit I discounted Desmond Reed as a viable option to be a primary back in this offense from the time he committed, largely due to his size. He is small. He comes up to the podium and he's short. You see it, okay? And like he would tell you, short is a very objective thing. You are either tall or you are short, and he is short. That's not a judgment on his ability, but I did write him off because of that. However, throughout training camp and throughout the summer, we've heard nothing but good things about Desmond Reed and what he can do in this offense. His knowledge of the offense, obviously, having played in it for a couple of years, his productivity and his effectiveness in the offense. Again, playing at the FCS level, but still, he's played in this offense. He's been very productive in this offense. And all those stats that I just told you, where he had 131 carries and 897 yards and 13 touchdowns, he did that in 8 games. 8. Rodney Hammond, all of his stats, where he had 13 fewer carries and 350 fewer yards and 9 fewer touchdowns and averaged 2.5 yards fewer per carry, he did in 12 games. Now again, personnel and usage questions and all of that, Reed was more effective. Playing in an FCS environment against FCS competition, he was more effective. Pat Narduzzi couldn't say enough about how tough Desmond Reed was in training camp. How tough of a guy, or in spring camp, how tough he seems to be. And that's going to be the biggest question. But we hear all the time from Cade Bell about how he gets players in space. He gets the ball to guys in space and gives them an opportunity to make plays. That's going to be the key with Reed and Raphael Williams and Sincere Lee and all 3 guys that they brought in from Western Carolina, one way or the other. They're going to need to get the ball in space. But I think he did that with Reed, who had 21 receptions for 283 yards last year. Rodney Hammond in his career has caught 22 passes. So a lot more usage for the running backs in the passing game last season at Western Carolina than what we've seen out of Pitt in the last few years. Reed might be a real wild card here. But I think that applies to just about everybody other than Rodney Hammond. Rodney Hammond's going to enter this season as the number one running back, and we'll see how that goes. But there's a wild card X factor element to Desmond Reed. There's a wild card X factor element to Derek Davis. I think there's a wild card X factor element to Juelz Goff and Montravius Lloyd, the two young guys. Lloyd, who redshirted last year, Goff, who enrolled as a true freshman in January. I think your top three are going to be Hammond, Reed, and Davis. I think Davis has some home run hitting ability that could potentially be of use to this offense. But I can't rule out Goff and Lloyd. There's a lot of intrigue and a lot of potential, but a lot of unknown when it comes to the running back core for Pitt this season. Is Rodney Hammond going to take the reins and seize the opportunity that should finally be presented to him? Is Desmond Reed going to be able to translate his productivity and explosiveness? He's got the speed, but is he going to be able to translate that from the FCS level to the ACC? Is Derek Davis finally going to be able to make a contribution out of, after not really doing anything at LSU and not being able to get onto the field last year at Pitt? Can they find some opportunities to get the ball in his hands and let him use his speed? As much of it as it might just be a direct straight line speed, you could still use that speed to make plays if you get the ball in space. And then Montravius Lloyd looks like the thickest out of all the backs. Is he going to be able to use that maybe on some goal line opportunities or something like that? And then Juelz Goff is a really talented freshman running back. And I don't think any of these guys has proven enough to automatically say, no, the freshman's not going to play. Not with Rodney Hammond and Desmond Reed and Derek Davis ahead of him. No, I can't go that far. And then Daniel Carter's there. I mean, we got to give an obligatory shout out to Daniel Carter. I don't know what his role is going to be in this offense. It's not going to be as a primary tailback. I don't know if they're really going to use a fullback or an H-back. And if they are going to use a fullback or an H-back, there's a guy wearing number 86 who should be back there getting those snaps. Daniel Carter, root for Pitt to get stopped inside the 5 a lot. Is what I would ultimately say. Like, root for Pitt to get inside the 5-yard line and get tackled and have a 1st and goal from the 3. Because that might be your time to shine, buddy. That might be it. Which has been largely the case over the course of his career. I don't think anything changes this year. I think that's where he fits in, and that's what he does best. And so the running back position this year, the storyline is, and the biggest question, they both revolve around the personnel, and they revolve around Rodney Hammond and whether he's ready to be that number one back, or if Desmond Reed is ready to step up at the FBS level, the ACC level. Each of these guys has an individual biggest question. They all kind of revolve around the same thing. Who can make the plays? I'm intrigued by Desmond Reed. I want to see him get opportunities. Week 2 at Cincinnati, I want to see him get opportunities. Week 3 against West Virginia, I want to see him get a chance. And if he can't do it, he can't do it. And you'll know, I think you'll have a pretty good idea after week 2 or week 3 whether or not he can hang. Shoot, you might have a good idea after week 1 if he can't get anything done against Kent State. But after week 2 or week 3, I think you're going to have a pretty good idea of whether Desmond Reed can translate from the FCS to the ACC. And if he can, then get wild with it and get him the ball in a lot of different ways. And if he can't, find ways to get the ball to Derek Davis. Find ways to maximize Rodney Hammond's ability and see if Juelz Goff is ready to play. It's going to be an interesting position to watch this season, for sure. All right, tomorrow we'll be talking about ACC Media Day stuff. We'll probably get into some wide receiver stuff, and who knows what might come up. I did not think yesterday that we were going to have news about Pitt scheduling a big-time Big Ten non-conference basketball game, but here we are. So we'll see what comes up today, and I'm sure we'll have plenty to talk about tomorrow. Make sure you like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, so you don't miss any of our Pitt video content, and check out the website, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today. I hope you had a great Monday. I hope your week is off to a great start. Enjoy your Tuesday, and we'll talk to you tomorrow on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.